my nads hot.
All right. Well, thank you for your hospitality, and real big appreciation to each of y'all for taking time out of your schedules to come, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of an exchange. I don't mind first introducing myself a little bit to you, and then however you all want to take the conversation, I'm happy to do. Obviously, I want to start by acknowledging all of the impacts of the hurricanes that we've had these past couple of weeks. In fact, prior to coming here, I was back on the phone with my city manager and folks in my city, because there appears to be another tropical system heading up through the Gulf, which is not very good for us because Tallahassee, as you know, is sort of up in that area. And our city dealt with Hurricane Hermine a year ago. We just obviously dealt with the impacts of Hurricane Irma. I'm sure, like we've done in my community, you all probably have been involved in some of the relief efforts for the British Virgin Islands, as well as for Puerto Rico, which we got a little bit more of an up close and personal view of with President Trump visiting them yesterday, embarrassing himself and the rest of us with his comments. But the situation there remains dire. I'm really proud of my city because we put a call out on Facebook and had something like, I think we ultimately filled up 4 big Penske trucks with all kinds of emergency supplies that you can and cannot even imagine. And then was able to link up with Airdrop, who will fly them into some of the, we've seen a lot of San Juan on television, but there are other, 67 or 68 other municipalities, counties that still need attention and obviously still need relief. And so I hope that you all will do everything that you can. This won't be an overnight situation. And I think that's the one thing that, our attention easily gets switched to the next kind of thing that's happening. But in many of these places, this is going to be a long-term recovery effort, or a long-term recovery event. And it just feels like the bad news keeps coming, because these past 2 days we've had to, all of us have had to absorb the tragic situation that's unfolded in Las Vegas, Nevada. Honestly, I didn't know that it would get much worse than what we saw a year ago at Pulse nightclub, where 50 lives were lost in that tragic occurrence. And then to see what happened, over 500 people injured, 58 folks lost their lives, at least that's what we know up to this point. And we're still waiting for the Republican leadership in the House and in the Senate and even in the presidency to call for the kinds of reforms that are going to be necessary, in my opinion, to not only help to curb these kinds of extreme violent incidences, but as y'all know, you've had your own experiences here. I know we've had them in my city. The incidences of gun violence, period. I know our attention all gets struck when we're dealing with a multitude of lives lost in one single incident, which obviously ripped out all of our hearts. But we know that every single day our communities are confronted and are dealing with how it is that we make our communities, our schools, our streets, our neighborhoods safer, in the face of real violent crime, and violent crime perpetuated with the use of guns and with weapons. These particular incidences are, in my opinion, insane, because in a matter of a few minutes, you can spray and snuff out the lives of so many people with very, very little effort and very, very little energy. And I have said before, and I'll say again, I don't believe weapons of war have a place on our city streets. And that's exactly what these weapons are intended for, in my opinion. They're weapons of war that allow individuals with malintent, with bad intent, to snuff out the lives of people. And we have to deal with the carnage of that and the psychological impacts of it, and the family has to deal most directly with the loss resulting from those occurrences. So we got a lot to consume us, without a doubt. And I'm hoping that you all would do everything that you can to raise your voices, not just in what we do, obviously in the storm recovery, which is, Mother Nature. I also believe that Mother Nature is getting even more fierce as our seas continue to warm. Last I checked, and I'm not a scientist either, share that with the governor. He says he's not, I'm not either, but I do believe in science. And the last time I checked, these storms are allowed to get more and more fierce based off of the warmness of water. That's why the Gulf scares me so much, because during this time of year, how warm those waters are, it terrifies me for the kind of impact that can be had as these storms gain strength and then make their way onto land. But we also have to deal with the human tragedy. And it's my hope that all of us will assert ourselves to being strong advocates when this next legislative session comes around, because without a doubt, somebody's gonna propose a bill that says we ought to have guns everywhere. It happened last session. It's the answer that the NRA and their friends go back to at every single recourse. And I always think about when I first became mayor of the city of Tallahassee, 2 days before I took the oath of office, there was a shooting incident that took place at Strozier Library at Florida State University. It happened to be right before midterms. So at 1 a.m., y'all know the story, the library's packed, right? Over 500 folks in the library. And a former student came back, he lived in Texas, decided he was gonna come back and exact his level of harm on the students at Florida State University. And on the turnstile, on the way in, he didn't have a card that could make his way through, and so he opened up fire right at the front entrance and started to fire randomly on individuals. A young man who worked in the Starbucks right there in the lobby of the library now is paralyzed from the waist down. We were fortunate that we were able to obviously remove the threat with the shooter, but could you imagine if every student in that library had a gun and law enforcement showed up on the scene and had to figure out and discern at a moment's notice what was good, what was bad, what was the threat, and who was being self-defending? It's a nearly impossible task for law enforcement. So it doesn't make our students safer, doesn't make our campuses safer, and I shudder to think what would happen if an incident like that played out on a campus like this or any other. And so we gotta question the logic of some of this stuff. But without a doubt, I want y'all to know that when January comes around, and probably before then during the committee weeks, that you're gonna have to be very attentive and awake to the bills that are being proposed, because my guess is, especially in the lead up to an election year, and the conservative members in the House and the Senate have to prove their bona fides to the NRA, that they're gonna go overboard trying to put out policies and legislation that inures them as being the most gun friendly. And unfortunately, what I think that means for us is less safer campuses and less safer streets. And if they get guns in the lobbies of airports, less safer airports. I mean, you name it. Those are the kinds you're thinking. I'm not trying to alarm you. I'm just telling you what we've seen in past legislative sessions and what I think we can fully anticipate in the march toward this next legislative session, particularly in an election year. Some of y'all may know just from my own bio that I ran for public office when I was 23 years old. I was fresh off the campus of Florida A&M University. Ran for a citywide seat, of which in a city I wasn't from. In fact, I was like from the enemy territory of Miami, of Gainesville, Florida, where UF resides. But I was born in Miami, so I also had the UM thing, kind of going, right? So the fact that this community allowed someone like me to come in from the outside and to compete to be that city's city commissioner was pretty amazing. I mean, we raised very little money. Most people said there's no way we're gonna win in a 7-way race in a city we weren't from. And we raised a whole whopping $6,000, which was like huge money for me. I've never seen that much in my life. And organized as much as we can, and we made our way around and talked to as many folks as we could. We organized students like nobody's business. Most people say students don't vote, they're not engaged, don't waste your time. And I said, well, it's hard to go out and vote when you don't know who's running. It's also hard to vote when somebody never comes and asks for your help, your support, or engages you in the race. You treat us like an appendage in this community rather than part of the bloodstream of this community. And so we registered young people and we got them engaged and got them involved. And because of their activism and their organization, we were able to get into the runoff and then ultimately win that seat, making me the youngest person in Tallahassee's history to serve on the Tallahassee City Commission. I share that with y'all because so often you'll hear, wait your turn, not old enough, don't have the right professions, didn't come from the right backgrounds. Whatever it is that people like to tell us to keep us from being engaged and involved, you're gonna hear those things. And what I wanna tell you is run anyway, organize anyway, show up and be involved in the process anyway. Young people aged 18 to 35 are about a quarter of this country, right? Yet we're fewer than 5% of those holding elected office, right? And so they'll come and they'll tell you you're good enough to volunteer, not good enough to run. You're good enough to go and knock doors and stand on street corners, but not good enough to make decisions for yourself and to determine what your future looks like. And I'll make the argument that we need more younger people in there who just by their very nature, whether they're more conservative or more progressive, they believe in climate change. They recognize the existential threat that sea level rise means for this country, for the planet, but also for us here in the state of Florida. We got a state that large part is under sea level, right? On a non-rain day at Miami Beach, they're closing down city streets because of high tide. We've been talking for a long time about the big one that might hit Tampa because of you all's predisposition and your susceptibility for high tide and for the kind of erosion that takes place. And quite frankly, I'm thankful it didn't happen this time, but the truth is that there will be a time. And that's why we have to make sure that we're electing leaders that are tending to the threat that climate change causes for the entire state of Florida, but if you're here in this area, particularly for the Tampa Bay region, right? But I actually see opportunity in that, y'all. I actually see the ability for us to elect leaders who, one, believe in the science, but two, commit themselves to doing everything that we can to make this state more resilient to climate change and sea level rise. What would it mean if we had a governor that said, we're gonna make being the Sunshine State actually mean something, right? We're gonna start to invest in solar energy and other renewable forms of energy, which by the way, are not just good for the planet, they're also good because it puts people to work. Can you imagine the kind of jobs that we could create in this state? The kind of research and development that could take place by virtue of us being willing to acknowledge that we've got a challenge around sea level rise and climate change, and that we're going to lead the rest of the country, indeed the rest of the world, and figuring out how you build more communities to be more resilient to that threat. That could be part of Florida's future economy. Yet we have leadership in Tallahassee who is willing to dig their heads in the sands on these kinds of questions, on these kinds of issues. We're not building the 21st century transportation system in this state that we deserve. Y'all saw the massive evacuations that took place in advance of Hurricane Irma. Well, what if we had high-speed rail that moved people out of harm's way? What if we had accepted the money from the Obama administration to build high-speed rail across the I-4 corridor, right? The population centers of the state of Florida to move people out of harm's way, but also help people to get to and from work and to athletic events and otherwise. In a real sensible fashion. We're the third largest state in America, y'all, right? We should act like it. We ought to have infrastructure that complements being the third largest state in America. And guess what else? It's good for the economy. It's good for the economy if we decide to lean into building that kind of infrastructure. It's better for the environment if we decide to do that and to build our state into a 21st century state. We also would be doing ourselves a great favor if we decided to lean into the challenge of healthcare that our state confronts. We got a lot of unhealthy people in the state. We have a lot of aging people in the state. We have a nursing shortage in the state of Florida. And on top of that, we decided that we were not going to extend Medicaid for 1.5 million of those medically demanding individuals that this state has to offer, turning away in total up to this point about $51 billion. $6 billion last year that could have come into this state. And not only could it have provided life-saving health care to people, but you want to know what else? It could have put people to work. Can you imagine the number of nurses, nurse practitioners, home care workers, doctors that could have gone to work had we decided to expand Medicaid in this state? So not only is it, in my opinion, the right decision morally, but it's also the right decision economically for the state of Florida. Y'all get my trend? Basically what we're saying is all the things that we care about, whether it's transportation, environment, housing, healthcare, right? We got everything that we need right here in this state to fix those things. And the better point about it is it also helps to put people to work. And not just any kind of work, y'all. I'm talking about work that allows people to make a good wage, to take care of themselves and their families. Roughly 46% of people in this state said that they cannot make ends meet at the end of the month, right? These are working folks. Folks who are getting up every single day doing everything that they can to provide a way for themselves and their families. Yet they can't earn enough to take care of themselves. Why? Because we don't have livable wages in this state, right? We got poverty level wages in this state, where folks gotta work multiple jobs. And even at the end of that, because there are people who are willing to cheat the system, they never give them full-time work, so they never have to cover health care, and then they end up on the public system, right? And guess what? Even for those of us who have health insurance, either by virtue of being on your parents' insurance, or if you're like me and you work and it's associated with your employer, even though we're covered, know that we still have premium increases year over year, and a large part of that is to make sure that we're able to pay for the parts of the system that aren't paying for themselves. So we're all paying into it. We're all paying into it. And I don't mind paying my fair share. I would just like not to do it inefficiently. I would like to do it in a way that allows people to get health care to maintenance themselves, and not just take care of them when they end up in the emergency rooms, which is not effective, not efficient, isn't life-saving in the way that maintenancing health care is, right? It's just bad for the system. And we need y'all. Y'all are the voices that we're gonna need on these issues to stand up and to speak out and to show up and to talk to people reasonably around how it is that we can make a state that is better and more responsive for you, for me, and for them, right? Some folks have asked me, Andrew, how the heck are you gonna win this race for governor? And I keep telling them, the way we're gonna win is we're gonna go everywhere. And we're gonna be willing to talk to everybody, whether we think that they are with us or they're not with us. Because guess what, Democrats, to the extent that you identify yourself as such, you're in the Democratic Club, so I hope so, right? But if you don't, there are folks out there who need to know what we stand for and what we believe in, and that we're offering them something to vote for and not just vote against, right? I've been unapologetic in saying I think Donald Trump is uniquely unqualified for the job that he holds, right? But I'm not about to run across this state talking all day about Donald Trump, right? We've litigated that, and he's the President of the United States. We'll get that chance to relitigate that in a couple more years. In the meantime, we gotta talk to people about the things that they're concerned about. We gotta talk to them about how we're gonna create an economy that works for them. How we're gonna make sure that y'all can get an education in this state without going bankrupt in the process. Talk to folks who are working people who are terrified of getting sick, right? Because if they get sick, they can't go to work. If they can't go to work, they can't earn a wage. They can't earn a wage, they can't pay their bills. They don't pay their bills, their lights go off. Their rent becomes due and they get an eviction notice. Their mortgage doesn't get paid, right? These are real live issues in our state. And we gotta be willing to talk to folks about what that looks like, because if I live in the Northern Panhandle and my kid is opioid addicted, or being pushed out of the public education system because of high stakes testing, which doesn't tell us what our kids know, but how well they take a test, or I'm working 2 and 3 jobs and I still can't earn enough to take care of myself and my family, I'm frustrated too. And I want to hear from an elected official and a person seeking office on what it is that they're going to do about that, right? And we've got to be committed to being willing to talk to those folks and have conversations and take some difficult questions and to listen and to respond. And then ask for their vote, right? Ask them what the other party has done for them lately, right? Other than divide them, cause them to otherize, because that person has you don't, right? What they fear most, the other side, is that we're gonna figure it out. That we got a lot more in common than what divides us. That we got a lot more if we decide to unite our forces and take on how it is that we strengthen public education rather than turn it over to the private sector, right? Or get real smart about criminal justice reform. Because locking more people up and throwing away the key does nothing to make our neighborhoods and our communities safer, right? Or the fact that we're not in the 1800s and people ought to have the ability to get back out of the criminal justice system and back into communities and make a way for themselves and their families without having to perpetually pay for a mistake, right? Or that we all ought to have access to health care because we believe it's a right and not a privilege in the wealthiest nation on planet Earth, right? let's be willing to be courageous and have those conversations. I know that I am. I know that I'm willing to go there. I want you to know that if you all make me the nominee of the Democratic Party, you're not gonna have a quitter. And you're also not gonna have anybody who's afraid of a fight. Because I've fought those fights before, to include the NRA, who had me in court for 2 years because I refused to repeal an ordinance in my city which said you cannot shoot a gun in a city park. Right? Radical. Radical. Can't shoot guns in city parks where kids play and families picnic. I stood up when marriage equality was approved by the Supreme Court, and we had county after county, some of them in my part of the state, saying that they would no longer issue marriage licenses. I stood up and said, come to Tallahassee and get married, where we recognize that love is love, right? We treat people with dignity and with respect, right? When we had a president, we still have one, unfortunately, who derides immigrants and refers to people as illegals. First thing I said is that a person can't be an illegal. Actions are illegal, people are not, right? But the reason they use that rhetoric is to strip folks of their humanity. Because if you can take away somebody's humanity, you can do anything to them, right? So that's the kind of person that you'll get in me, someone who's willing to stand up and to fight back and to push back. And not just push back, but to advocate for the things that we know we need. But I can't get there alone, right? I can't get there alone. I need the University of Tampa. I need every bit of your energy, right? I told you before about not just working on campaigns, but also pursuing office. I want you to work on my campaign and pursue office, right? Be multi-talented, multi-focused. We can do that. We need your help organizing in this area. We need, for those of you who have $5 to give or whatever it is, to offer that up in our campaign, because we don't have the most money raised in this race, but we got more individual donors than anybody else running, right? Last we checked, we got new reports coming out, we'll see. But that says a lot. That means those are individuals, small donor folks that we're gonna be able to convert into voters and activists and organizers and sign waivers and candidates for office on our list, and we wanna add you to it. So I'll tell you, I'm unafraid in this race. I'm unafraid in this race because we've had 20 years under Republican leadership, and our state has paid the cost, right? We paid the cost by privatizing the public education. We paid the cost with high stakes testing, which are increasingly meaningless, and other experts are beginning to recognize that. We paid the cost by having a nursing shortage and a teaching shortage in this state because of the way in which we demonize those professions, all right? We paid the price by being unwilling to build the kind of infrastructure that we deserve. We paid the price by having a legislature that raids affordable housing funds and makes housing in this state increasingly unaffordable, right? We paid the price because we have an education system that we gotta fix, not just at the kindergarten through 12th grade level, but from 0 to 5, from K to 12, and then from 12 to 20, and all the training that may come in and after, right? We paid that price. So we know what we get under their leadership. And now it's time to trust Democrats again to lead in this state. And more importantly, and frankly, more directly, I hope you'll trust this Democrat, right, to help lead in this state again. I'm gonna stop talking and I wanna take y'all's questions, okay? All right, any questions?